Welcome to DCF Investigations. There are mysteries that fade with time, eroding like footprints in the sand until they are nothing but whispers of the past. And then there are cases that do the opposite. They grow, they fester, they become etched into the global consciousness, haunting the collective psyche of the world. Tonight, we are opening the file on perhaps the most scrutinized, debated, and heartbreaking disappearance in modern history. We are traveling back to the spring of 2007, to the sun-drenched coast of the Algarve region in Portugal. We are going to examine the vanishing of Madeleine McCann. To understand the magnitude of this event, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Praia da Luz in May of 2007. It was a time before the ubiquity of smartphones and instant social media updates. Though the internet was certainly alive and waiting to consume this story, the Algarve is known for its breathtaking golden cliffs, its sapphire waters, and its reputation as a safe, family-friendly haven for British tourists. It is a place where the air smells of salt and blooming bougainvillea, a place designed for relaxation. It was here that Jerry and Kate McCann, two doctors from Leicestershire, England, chose to spend their holiday. They arrived on Saturday, April 28, 2007, looking forward to a week of respite from their demanding medical careers. They brought with them their 3 children. There was Madeleine, a bright, precocious 3-year-old with a distinctive mark in her right eye, a coloboma that looked like a bleeding strip of the iris. And there were the twins, Sean and Amélie, who were just 2 years old. The McCanns were not traveling alone. They were part of a group that the media would later dub the Tapas 7. This group consisted of their friends, fellow professionals who had brought their own families along for the trip. They were staying at the Ocean Club, a sprawling resort complex of whitewashed apartments and lush gardens. The McCanns were allocated apartment 5A on the ground floor of Block 5. This location is crucial to everything that follows. Apartment 5A was a corner unit, accessible by the front door, but also accessible via patio doors at the back, which led out to a small veranda, the resort's swimming pool area. It also bordered a public street, creating a unique vulnerability that would be dissected for decades. For the first few days, the holiday was idyllic. The rhythm of life in Praia da Luz was slow. The families spent their mornings at the tennis courts and their afternoons by the pool. The children were enrolled in the resort's kids club, where they participated in activities like face painting and sailing lessons. Madeleine was described by the staff as happy and engaging. There was no sign of the storm that was about to break. The group had established a nightly routine that would become the focal point of the investigation. Every evening, after bathing the children and putting them to bed around 7 or 7:30 p.m., the adults would head to the resort's tapas restaurant for dinner. The restaurant was situated within the complex, roughly 55 yards away from apartment 5A. Crucially, from where they sat, they could not directly see the doors of the apartment due to a wall and some vegetation, though it was a very short walk. Rather than using the resort's babysitting service or bringing the children with them, the group decided to conduct their own patrols. They set up a system where one of the adults would leave the dinner table roughly every 20 to 30 minutes to check on the children in their respective apartments. They were listening for crying, checking that doors were closed, and ensuring the children were asleep. It was a system built on trust and the assumption of safety in a sleepy resort town. On the morning of Thursday, May 3rd, the day began like any other. There is a photograph taken that day, the last known image of Madeleine, She is sitting by the pool, dangling her feet in the water, wearing a pink hat and holding a blue ball. She looks content. Later, during breakfast, Madeleine asked her mother a question that would haunt Kate McCann forever. Madeleine asked why her parents hadn't come when she and her brother Sean had cried the previous night. This statement terrified Kate in hindsight, suggesting that perhaps someone had tried to enter, or that the children had been distressed and unheard, exposing a flaw in their checking system. The afternoon passed with tennis and high tea for the children. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ocean club, the families prepared for their final night of the routine. Kate McCann put Madeleine and the twins to bed in the back bedroom of apartment 5A. Madeleine was dressed in pink and white Eeyore pajamas. She was placed in a single bed next to the travel cots where the twins slept. Kate closed the window and the shutters, but she left the bedroom door slightly ajar so that light could filter in. She then joined the group at the Tapas restaurant around 8:30 p.m. The timeline of that evening has been reconstructed minute by minute, yet gaps and contradictions remain. At approximately 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann left the table to check on his children. He entered via the patio doors, which were left unlocked to allow the parents access. He observed that all 3 children were sound asleep. However, he noticed something odd. The bedroom door, which Kate had left slightly ajar, was now standing wide open. He thought little of it, pulling it back to its original position before leaving. On his way back to the restaurant, Jerry stopped to chat with a fellow tourist, a man named Jeremy Wilkins. They stood on the street just outside the apartment complex. While they were talking, another member of the group, Jane Tanner, walked past them to check on her own children. It was at this moment, roughly 9:15 p.m., that the first major piece of potential evidence emerged. Jane Tanner later reported seeing a man walking away from the apartment complex carrying a child. She described the man as carrying a small child wearing pink pajamas. At the time, she didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another parent. This sighting, known as the Tanner sighting, would dictate the police timeline for years, although its significance would eventually be fiercely debated. Around 9:30 p.m., another member of the group, Matthew Oldfield, went to check. He listened at the door of the McCann's apartment. He heard nothing. He saw the twins in their cots, but he did not step far enough into the room to see Madeleine's bed. He noticed the bedroom door was wide open again, but he assumed Madeleine was simply sleeping quietly. He left without confirming her presence. At 10:00 p.m., it was Kate McCann's turn. She walked back to apartment 5A. She entered through the patio doors. Immediately, she felt that something was wrong. The atmosphere in the room had changed. She noticed the bedroom door was open. A draft slammed the door shut. When she opened it, she saw the window was open and the external shutters were raised all the way up. She looked at the bed. Madeleine was gone. Kate searched the small apartment frantically. She checked the parents' bedroom, the bathroom, the cupboards. Silence. She ran back to the restaurant, screaming words that would echo through the years. They have taken her. The chaos that ensued was immediate and total. The group rushed to the apartment. Staff were alerted. They began searching the immediate vicinity, calling out Madeleine's name into the darkness. The local police, the GNR, were called, but the response was sluggish by modern standards. They arrived well after 11 p.m. By then, The crime scene had been hopelessly compromised. Scores of people, the parents, the friends, resort staff, and police officers, had trampled through apartment 5A. They touched surfaces, moved furniture, and potentially destroyed delicate forensic evidence that could have solved the case in hours. When the Polícia Judiciária, or PJ, the Portuguese Criminal Investigation Police, arrived the next morning, they were met with a scene of confusion. Border controls were not immediately implemented. Roadblocks were not set up until hours after the discovery. If an abductor had a vehicle, they had a massive head start and could have easily crossed into Spain, which was only a short drive away. The early days of the investigation were characterized by a frantic search for a missing child. The local community in Luz rallied, searching scrubland, wells, and abandoned buildings. But as the days turned into weeks without a ransom demand or a body, the atmosphere shifted. The Portuguese police began to look inward. They focused on a local resident named Robert Murat. Murat lived near the apartment with his mother. He had been helpful in the early days, acting as a translator, which the police found suspicious. He had a glass eye and a distinctive appearance. He was made an arguido, or formal suspect. His home was raided, his pool drained, his life dissected. Yet, no evidence linking him to Madeleine was ever found. He would later be cleared and win substantial libel damages from the press. As the investigation dragged on, the relationship between the McCanns and the Portuguese authorities deteriorated. The media frenzy was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The face of Madeleine McCann was everywhere. On billboards, on milk cartons, at major sporting events. The McCanns hired PR consultants to keep the story alive, believing that public awareness was the only way to find their daughter. However, this media campaign also bred cynicism. 4 months into the investigation, the focus shifted dramatically and devastatingly toward Jerry and Kate McCann. The Portuguese police, under intense pressure to solve the case, began to entertain a darker theory. That Madeleine had died in the apartment, perhaps from an accident or an overdose of sedatives, and that the parents had covered it up. To test this theory, they brought in 2 highly specialized dogs from the UK. Eddie, a victim recovery dog trained to smell the scent of death, and Keela, a crime scene dog trained to detect human blood. Footage of these dogs working in apartment 5A is chilling. Eddie, the cadaver dog, barked and alerted in the living room behind a sofa and in the bedroom near the wardrobe. Keela alerted to a spot on the floor. The police also examined the rental car the McCanns had hired weeks after the disappearance. The dogs allegedly alerted to the key fob and the trunk of the car. This seemed to be the smoking gun the police were looking for. DNA samples were taken and sent to a lab in Birmingham, England. The results, however, were inconclusive. The DNA profile was complex and could not definitively be matched to Madeleine. It was a partial match, one that could belong to many people. Despite the lack of concrete forensic proof, the suspicion was enough for the Portuguese police to name Jerry and Kate McCann as arguidos in September 2007. They were subjected to intense interrogations. The police suggested that if Kate confessed to an accidental death, she would receive a lenient sentence. She refused, maintaining her innocence and insisting her daughter had been abducted. The backlash was severe. The tabloid press, which had initially beatified the McCanns, turned on them. Every expression, every lack of tears, every decision was analyzed and often demonized. The public was divided into two camps: those who believed the parents were victims of a heinous crime, and those who believed they were hiding a terrible secret. In 2008, the Portuguese police shelved the investigation due to a lack of evidence. The arguido status was lifted from the McCanns and Robert Murat. But for the parents, the nightmare was far from over. They continued their private search, hiring private investigators like Metodo 3 and Oakley International. These private investigations produced sketches and leads, but often led to dead ends and fraudsters looking to make a quick profit from the family's desperation. One of the most significant leads that emerged from the private investigations and later police reviews was the Smithman sighting. Earlier, we discussed the Tanner sighting, the man seen carrying a child at 9:15 p.m. For years, this was the primary suspect. However, in a stunning twist, a British tourist came forward years later to say he was the man Jane Tanner saw. He had been carrying his own daughter home from the night creche. This revelation was pivotal. It meant the 9:15 p.m. timeline was likely irrelevant. This shifted the focus to a sighting by the Smith family. Around 10 p.m. on the night of the disappearance, Martin Smith and his family were walking back to their apartment from the beach. They saw a man walking up the hill, away from the Ocean Club and toward the beach area, carrying a young girl. The girl was in pajamas. The man did not look like a tourist. He didn't look comfortable. This sighting occurred at the exact time Kate McCann was discovering Madeleine missing. The composites drawn from the Smith family's description depicted a man with mid-length brown hair. This is now considered the most credible sighting of the abductor. In 2011, the British government launched Operation Grange. This was a massive review of the case by Scotland Yard. They scanned thousands of documents, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined forensic evidence. They treated the case as an abduction aimed at a stranger. They spent millions of pounds digging up scrubland and chasing leads across Europe. For years, it seemed like just another expensive exercise in futility. But then, in June 2020, the case exploded back into the headlines with a breakthrough that shook the world. German prosecutors announced they had a new prime suspect. His name was Christian Brueckner. Brueckner is a German national with a terrifying criminal history. He has convictions for sexual abuse of children and drug trafficking. Crucially, records placed him in the Algarve area between 1995 and 2007. He lived a transient lifestyle, residing in a rundown farmhouse and often living out of a VW camper van. The evidence against Brueckner is circumstantial but compelling. Cell phone tower data placed his phone near the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz on the night of May 3, 2007. He received a phone call at 7:32 p.m., just an hour before the abduction, which lasted for 30 minutes. The person on the other end of that line has never been identified, but police believe that person holds the key to the case. Furthermore, Brueckner was known to break into holiday apartments. Witnesses described him as having a fixation on the Ocean Club. Even more chilling is a conversation he allegedly had with a friend at a bar in 2013. When the topic of Madeleine McCann came up, Brueckner reportedly said, "The child is dead, and that's a good thing," or words to that effect, implying he knew her fate. In his farmhouse, police found children's swimwear and thousands of images of child abuse on hard drives buried in the ground. German authorities have been unusually confident. The prosecutor, Hans Christian Wolters, has stated publicly that they have concrete evidence that Madeleine is dead. However, they have not released this evidence to the public, likely to protect the integrity of a potential future trial. They believe Brueckner killed her shortly after the abduction. As of late 2023 and entering 2024, the investigation remains active but fraught with legal complexities. Brueckner is currently in prison in Germany for the rape of a 72-year-old American woman in Praia da Luz in 2005, a crime that occurred very close to where Madeleine was taken. This conviction demonstrates his capability for violent intrusion in that specific area. In May 2023, police launched a major search of the Arade Dam reservoir, a location Brueckner called his little paradise. They spent days digging, using ground-penetrating radar and drones. While they recovered several items, it is not yet clear if any of them are definitively linked to Madeleine. We must also address the myriad of conspiracy theories that have sprouted like weeds around this case. There is the theory that Madeleine was taken by a child trafficking ring, smuggled to Belgium or Morocco. There is the theory of a burglary gone wrong, where the thief was startled and took the child to silence her. And of course, the theory that the parents were involved persists in dark corners of the internet. Despite the relentless clearance of the McCanns by official British and German authorities, the sheer volume of misinformation has made it incredibly difficult to separate fact from fiction. One of the most tragic aspects of this case is the sightings. Over the years, Madeleine has been seen in Morocco, in New Zealand, in Paraguay. In early 2023, a Polish woman named Julia Wendell went viral claiming to be Madeleine. She pointed to similarities in her eyes and facial structure. The world held its breath again. However, DNA tests eventually proved she was 100% Polish, with no relation to the McCanns. It was another cruel false dawn for a family that has endured nearly 2 decades of torture. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has changed the way the world looks at parenting and safety. It ended the era of the free-range holiday. It highlighted the dangers of leaving children unattended, even for a moment, even in a place that feels like paradise. It also exposed the flaws in international police cooperation and the voracious, often destructive nature of the 24-hour news cycle. Today, Apartment 5A sits quietly in Praia da Luz. The town has tried to move on, but the shadow remains. The McCanns, now older, their other children grown, still buy presents for Madeleine on her birthday. They still hold on to a sliver of hope, however thin, that they will one day know the truth. The investigation continues. The German police are building their case against Christian Brueckner, hoping to charge him formally with Madeleine's murder. But until a body is found or a confession is made, the story of the little girl in the pink pajamas remains unfinished. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, a narrative with no ending. This case forces us to confront our deepest fears. The fear of the stranger in the dark. The fear of a momentary lapse in judgment leading to a lifetime of regret. And the terrifying reality that sometimes people just vanish. This has been a deep dive into the archives of DCF Investigations. We have walked the streets of Praia da Luz, analyzed the timeline, and scrutinized the suspects. But the final verdict often lies in the court of public opinion. What do you believe happened that night in May 2007? Is the answer sitting in a German prison cell? Or is the truth buried somewhere in the vast, arid landscape of the Algarve? Share your theories in the comments below. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and we will see you in the next investigation.